The next learning objective is to distinguish among operating, investing, and financing cash flows. So before we can start working on a statement of cash flows, we have to know the three areas and the things that go into each area. So this is just a broad overview of the three areas. We'll get into more details in a little bit. The first section is called the operating section, and in it goes the day-to-day operations of the business, buying and selling. In the investing section, what goes in there are changes to long-term assets, such as buying long-term assets and selling them. In the financing section, changes to equity or changes to long-term liabilities goes into this section. So let's look into these in more detail. Operating activities is the most important category of the three categories. It reflects your day-to-day transactions. Pretty much it emphasizes buying and selling your inventory and selling your services. So these activities will be creating revenues and expenses, and they're also the transactions that make up net income. So we'll find out later that net income is the very first thing that we list in the operating activity section. And the last category that goes into the operating activities are changes to current assets and changes to current liabilities from the balance sheet. Now, an example of this is if our inventory goes down, we must have sold inventory, therefore cash went up. So we will learn about those types of details and analysis later. So we're looking at the statement of cash flows. Here is the operating activity section. So what number is at the top of the operating activity section? Net income. But why? Net income is pretty close to the amount of actual cash flow. So in this example, we've got positive $40,000 of net income, and we've got minus $20,000 of cash. So cash decreased by $20,000. In the grand scheme of things, those are relatively close. So what we're going to learn how to do in this chapter is we're going to analyze just a few accounts. Notice these few accounts that we're analyzing, not a whole lot. And we can adjust net income either up or down. Notice this depreciation is adjusting net income upwards. The gain on a disposable plant asset is adjusting it downwards. We will learn later why we do that. So we're going to just learn how to analyze these few accounts, which is much easier than analyzing thousands of cash transactions to achieve this number, so plus $70,000 of net cash from operating activities. The next section is investing activities. This section is relatively easy. What goes in it are transactions that increase or decrease our long-term assets. The most common transactions are purchases and sales of plant assets. They include things like computers, land, buildings, equipment, furniture, etc. And the last of the three main sections is financing activities. What goes in here are increases or decreases to long-term liabilities and owner's equity. So an example of affecting equity is issuing stock. If we issue stock and we get cash, then that cash has to go into this financing activity section as a positive number. If we pay dividends, remember paying dividends affects equity by lowering retained earnings. If we're paying dividends, then cash is going down, so we would subtract it from this section. Another example of a transaction that would go in this section that affects equity is buying and selling treasury stock. So if we buy treasury stock, that would be a minus because cash is going down. If we sell treasury stock, cash is going up, so we would add that cash amount to the financing section. And also if we borrow money or pay off loans, that goes in the financing activity section. But be careful. When we pay off a loan, the principal of the loan goes into the financing activity. So if we paid off $2,000 of principal, we would put that as a minus 2,000 in the financing activity section. But if there is interest expense that goes along with that loan, then the interest expense, remember, all expenses go in the operating activity section. So we'll get a lot more practice figuring out what goes in where, but this is just a broad overview for now.